So, hello again, students of ancient history. I'm glad you're back for this lecture on ancient Israel, which we will be going over. And last time we looked at the civilizations of Asia in about 35 minutes. So, all of Asia over the course of 5 millennia in 35 minutes. I think that's pretty well done. Um, So we looked at the great civilizations of the Indus and Ganges river valleys in India, as well as the Yangtze, as well as Yellow River civilizations in China, as well as the peoples of the Asian steppes that spread across all of the 3,000-mile grasslands that unite the Caspian European steppes and the Far East. We also looked at trade routes, which is something very important, and the Silk Road. And today I want to kind of look back at the ancient Near Eastern region and kind of how trade and how the farthest western portion of the ancient world kind of connected with the far eastern portion of the world to some degree. And ancient Israel is it's kind of strange that honestly that you would look at this tiny nation. Why are we not looking at the Amorites or the Moabites or some other tiny backwater nation in or kingdom in the ancient Near East? We have looked at the very big and important empires of the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Hittites, the Egyptians. But why are we kind of giving privilege to this one tiny nation? And I think it's because that it's so important to understand where Israel comes out of, because Israel plays such a prominent role in our Western cultural heritage. Because the religion of Israel has so dominated the history of the West, of the ancient Near East, and throughout the world through Judaism and into Christianity. And therefore it kind of has some privilege, but it also occupies a very important geographical position in the ancient world. So it often finds itself at the center of warring empires. Now, Israel is this tiny little place in the land of Canaan. It was formerly Canaan before it became Israel. And the great empires of the Hittites, of the Assyrians here in the north of Mesopotamia, the Babylonians in the south, and the Egyptians, that they are right on two of the very main trade routes and roads that go through the area. There is a road that goes right along the coast. It is called the Via Maris, and this is the main route that armies, that traders, people took when they moved through the ancient Near East. So these great empires are going to basically treat Israel like a billiard ball here, that they will manipulate it, they will hit it, they will use it to their advantage. But Israel occupies a very strategic point here, as I say, on the Via Maris, and also on another route called the King's Highway that goes along the eastern side here of the Dead Sea and the Transjordan region. So this is why Israel is geographically important, and it's really its cultural and religious legacy to the West is another reason why we are studying Israel and not someone else. So Israel itself, Canaan, the land of Canaan, is basically made up of four major geographical regions. And as I say, you have the coastal plain here, which is where the Via Maris is, the way of the sea, which is the main road. And then you have this sort of central, the coastal plains. Then you have the Central Valley. You have the Central Highlands, and the Transjordan region here. And Israel is dominated by its great capital city, that's made very famous for the three world religions of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is located here within the Central Highlands, and it is hard to exaggerate the importance of Jerusalem in the history of the ancient Near East, and as well as even later in medieval history. But Israel is going to again play such an important role here because this road, the King's Highway, that comes right along the Dead Sea here between these two very hilly regions, as well as the Via Maris. So this is why we bother studying Israel. So how did Israel come to be Israel? And within the sacred scripture of the Jews in the Torah, which are the first 5 books of the Christian Bible, or the Old Testament, and you were slated to read the first 12 chapters of Genesis, and unfortunately you don't get the Exodus story within this, but there is one of the books in the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, that the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, and their great leader Moses brought them out of Egypt with the help of their God. And it has been for centuries thought, or it was thought, that this was a very a literal interpretation, that the Exodus was an actual event, that Moses brought the Israelites out of the land of Egypt and took them to the promised land promised by their God, to the land of Canaan. That God had promised the Israelites this land from the time of the oldest ancestors of when Abraham, the great patriarch, immigrated to the land of Canaan from Mesopotamia. Now, there's the only problem with the literal interpretation is that there's not a scrap of historical evidence hardly to support a literal interpretation. That this is really in the realm of religion, of myth, and to some degree. But that is not to say that it is not an important thing, because we have a historical kernel, as Joseph Campbell always reminds us, in all myth, that in all stories there is a sort of historical kernel of truth. That it preserves a memory through a great story. That it might not be entirely or literally true, but there is some aspect of that story that has some truth in it. And we remember when we looked at Egypt, we talked about the expulsion of the Hyksos. And the Hyksos are this bearded people that are driven into the land of Canaan, who for a time rule over part of Egypt. And within the Genesis account of Israel, it preserves a memory of one of the patriarchs, Joseph, who goes into Egypt and becomes a high official within Egypt. And this is Hebrew scripture, of course, but we have this story of the Hyksos, who were ruling over, had some power within Egypt, and eventually the Egyptians drove them out into the land of Canaan. So this could be perhaps the historical kernel, or a historical truth within this, and that's just a theory. That's just a possible theory. And there is another thought. How the Israelites came to be the Israelites is the conquest theory. And this just simply is where there are tribal peoples that came into Canaan and conquered the land of Israel. It is preserved within the book of Joshua that there is this conquest of the land of Israel by the Israelites who are coming in to conquer the Canaanite tribes. There's another slow migration theory. So this could be that the Hyksos or other tribes simply came into the area and just assimilated within the Canaanite regions and tribes. And then there's a peasant uprising theory, that there is the Bronze Age crisis that begins around the year 1200. And this is a time where civilization is wiped out in many regions. Ruling powers are thrown down, that there is anarchy, there is law and order is lost, and centralized control fails everywhere all over the ancient world. Much like the Dark Ages of the later medieval period. So in this time, the peasants or the slave class of people rise up over and overthrow their masters who once controlled them. So again, these are all theories of how Israel came about. So Israel is most famous in the ancient world for its religion. It is almost unique in its monotheistic religion. So when I say monotheistic religion, that means the worship of one God and one God alone. Everywhere else, basically, other outside of the case of some Zoroastrians and later in Persia, but Israel's much earlier than this, um, you don't see any monotheistic religion. There's an attempt or two in Egypt to try this, but they're epic failures. And Israel is uniquely devoted to one God. And within the Old Testament, and we'll get into this in just a moment, or the Torah, it is a demonstration of why this particular God is so powerful and is so unique. And this one particular God has selected these specific group of people, and therefore they construct a great temple. One of their kings, Solomon, builds this magnificent temple in Jerusalem that honors this God, the God of the Israelites. So they are unique in that, and they live in a world of polytheists. So constantly, there are other people who, or that they are constantly straying from their religion, and it's very important within Israelite religion that they remain monotheists. That they always seem to get themselves in trouble by creating other gods or worshiping other gods, at least within the scriptural interpretation. So, just a bit of political history, and there is a sort of a warring states period, kind of with the where it's often defined as the period of the judges, where there are these kind of legendary mythological figures like Samson, who's very much a Hercules-like figure who goes out and slays 10,000 men by himself with the bone of a donkey, his a jawbone of a donkey, and et cetera, et cetera. And Gideon, who is this great war leader who with 300 men conquers an army of 20,000 Moabites, and these sorts of things. And then when we really begin to see we have a true historical record of things is with the beginning of the United Monarchy, the Davidic monarchy. The King David, who is Israel's really their greatest king, comes to the throne around the year 1000. And he unites Israel and Judea. So you have Israel here in the north and Judea in the south, which are kind of two separate tribal regions, and made up of various groups of the Israelites as they appropriated themselves within their own tribal makeup. So 12 tribes, at least in theory, total, and then that's how you would identify, much like the Egyptians with their nomes. And there's 2 tribes of the south and 10 in the north. And from time to time, Israel would be destroyed. And the United Monarchy is really only under David and Solomon. Solomon famously builds the temple, as I was suggesting earlier, for the great glory of the God of Israel. And after this 100-year period of where there were the two really great kings of Israel, David and Solomon, you see the fracturing of Israel proper. That it becomes 2 distinct regions that shares a common heritage, a common language, but it is never really again united until the 19th century. And we see there's a very famous destruction and deportation of the Israelites in 721 when the Assyrians come and they conquer Jerusalem. Remember this great empire in northern Mesopotamia? They come and they conquer Jerusalem, and then they take many of the leading Israelites. They take thousands of the Israelites, and they take them back to Mesopotamia in a diaspora. This is kind of the first great diaspora. And then in 586, this is the really epic destruction of Jerusalem, where King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon razes it to the ground, and there's again another mass deportation, another diaspora of Jews into southern Mesopotamia. And in this time, the Temple of Solomon, the great and legendary Temple of Solomon, is destroyed in 586. So here you can see some of the where the Israelites were deported, and eventually they make their way back to Israel over time, but they're never again fully reunited as they were under the time of the United Monarchy. So it is only at the time of the Persian period, when King Cyrus the Great allows the Israelites to return to Israel to rebuild Jerusalem, and then there's a lot of legendary figures within this time period. The prophets Ezra and Nehemiah, who rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and they rebuild the temple eventually. Not as great as the Temple of Solomon, but they were able to successfully repopulate and rebuild their land. And then the final destruction of the Second Temple period is in 72, when the Romans, or 72 AD, when the Romans destroy the temple and wipe them out entirely. And then there's this great council that takes place where the Jewish elders come together and at Jamnia, and a leading group of legal philosophers, priests, the Pharisees, agree that they will continue to have their religion with only the law, and they will not ever rebuild the temple, or at least they will not rebuild the temple for a time. And this is really key to later Judaism and religion and the culture of Israel, in that the law at this point, the laws of Moses, the first, the 5 books of the Torah, are what is key to the Jewish religion, the faith, at this point, and it is not focused on this temple where they literally believed that the presence of God resided. So within the sacred scriptures, there are a lot of interesting writings and how that the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Christian Bible, were all put together. And this is a kind of an older theory, but the Wellhausen thesis, and is that there were groups of priests that were particularly devoted to a certain aspect of the religion that wrote each one, and that there are different sources, and it's kind of pieced together, and it's all a bit technical, but it's kind of a fascinating aspect of the sacred religion of the Jews. If you wish to pursue this, it is called the Wellhausen thesis, and it argues, for instance, in Genesis, which you are reading, you will see in occasions when the word Lord is used, and the first L is capitalized and none of the rest of the word is capitalized. So capital L-O-R-D, it means Elohim in Hebrew. So it's an E source. Elohim, which just literally means God, lowercase, in the same sense that Poseidon or Zeus or whoever is the gods. It's as it would be, David Hill is a man. So man, God, the same thing. Now, when you see Lord in all capital letters, so L-O-R-D in all capital letters, it is a J source, meaning from the Latin Jehovah, or the proper name of God in Hebrew is Yahweh. Of course, any Orthodox Jew would say that you cannot pronounce the name. It is called Adonai, meaning the name. But the proper name of God is Yahweh, and it's deeply offensive to any Orthodox Jew to say this, to say the proper name of God. But any time that you see Lord in all caps, it is the proper name of God is being used. So you can kind of have some fun with this as you read, and it's fascinating if you speak out the actual words, how differently, and you see how different sources are put together. There's different creation accounts of humankind based upon if you look at the E source and the J source. So again, I stress you have some fun with this and look into this. And finally, I just want to close with a flood myth. So you will be reading the account of Noah. We've read the Epic of Gilgamesh, and we have looked at the Emperor Yu, who was kind of this legendary flood myth emperor of China. And we have seen how the power of flood mythology has just gone into this thinking of ancient peoples, that it is so pervasive among them that every civilization that comes about in a river valley has some notion of this flood myth. And the Israelites, who their legendary figure Abraham comes out of the city of Ur, which is in southern Mesopotamia, and he immigrates to Canaan. So we see the preservation of this kind of Utnapishtim, Gilgamesh kind of flood myth. That where the world is destroyed by the flood, Noah, the Israelite God, decides he's going to destroy the world because it's too sinful. The gods of Mesopotamia destroy the world because the people are too noisy. So we see this sort of anger of the gods directed at humankind in some way, and that there is some virtuous person, whether it be Noah or Utnapishtim, that is preserved because of their uprightness and also their wisdom in order to construct a boat and be able to avoid this flood. But it shows the power of the flood in the mind of ancient peoples. So keep these things in mind as you go through your readings this week, that we are always trying to focus on the big picture here. So thank you, everybody, for listening, and I hope that you are learning a lot from this these lectures, and that we are able to enlighten you in how the ancient world is coming together. So until next time, stay healthy, wealthy, and wise.